Invincible is one of my favorite shows on TV right now. The stellar action sequences, the insane violence, the three-dimensional characters, basically every aspect about the show. It's literally everything I could want in a superhero series. Season 2 is on its way, and I wanted to give my thoughts on the show, as well as how it compares to the comic book that it's adapting. It wasn't until after I finished Season 1 of the show that I read the comic, and I'm glad I read it because it was great. I get some people not wanting to do this because they like to go in completely blind, not knowing anything about what happens next in the show. But since the TV series is still fairly new and hasn't adapted that much from the source material yet, I didn't mind reading ahead. And it's great not having to worry about spoilers either, so that's a bonus. However, the best part about reading the comic book is that now I can compare it to the TV show and see all the similarities and differences between the two. And that brings us to the topic of this video. Because aside from the art style of the comic book being superior, the TV show manages to improve upon the comic book in just about every other way imaginable. It's a very impressive feat considering how good the comic book already is, but the TV show is able to take what already works and make it work even better. Like they say, there's always room for improvement. The TV show makes many changes to the comic book, some big, some small, but all of which improve the story in a multitude of ways. It really is amazing how even the littlest of changes can end up making such a huge difference. It's clear that Robert Kirkman, the writer of the Invincible comic book, knew what he was doing when he was developing the TV show, wanting to retell this story in a brand new way. So I'm going to talk about the changes the TV show made to the comic book and explain how they enhanced the story. There are so many changes that I love, but I don't want this video to get too long, so I'll only discuss my absolute favorites. So let's begin. Major spoilers for the comic book and TV show. You've been warned. First thing I want to discuss is the death of the Guardians of the Globe. This is an integral moment to the comic book and the TV show, serving as the big turning point in the story as well as setting the tone for the rest of the series. The Guardians of the Globe, Earth's ultimate superhero team, are all murdered by Omni-Man, a man who at this point had been presented as a fellow superhero, a man who we were led to believe was a well-intentioned and loving family man. But this rug pull changed everything, subverting our expectations of a superhero series. Overall, this moment works well in both versions of the story, but here's how the TV show improves upon the comic book. For starters, in the comic book, there is no fight. Omni-Man kills all of them effortlessly. On one hand, it actually is pretty cool. Robert Kirkman developed the world of Invincible to seem almost identical to the worlds of DC or Marvel at face value. The Guardians of the Globe, for example, can potentially be seen as the Justice League. And Omni-Man, of course, can potentially be seen as Superman. If you know who the Justice League are, then you probably know that they're all friends and that they all trust each other and whatnot. So imagine the shock of seeing these heroes who have been presented as a Justice League type group, all getting slaughtered like they're just faceless stormtroopers by their de facto Superman. With that said, the show's version of this moment where the Guardians of the Globe fight Omni-Man in a long and brutal battle works even better, because it gives the audience a glimmer of hope. It makes them think just for a second that maybe the Guardians of the Globe will actually triumph and defeat Omni-Man. But in the end, he kills them all, one by one, thus making this moment all the more devastating. They also changed Immortal's last words to Omni-Man before he's killed. In the comic book, Immortal says, "I never liked you," before immediately getting decapitated. This works just fine as it is, but the show makes this moment a bit more emotional. The Immortal simply asks why, wanting to know why they were betrayed by the man they trusted. And we can empathize with the Immortal here because we want to know why too. In general, the show is a bit more emotional than the comic book, which is a welcome addition. Arguably, the show's greatest strength is its ability to expand on characters, plot points, and little moments from the comic book. There isn't much build-up to Omni-Man being outed as evil in the comic. It happens only a few issues after he's killed the Guardians of the Globe. But in the show, we get to see several investigations being conducted. Cecil, Damien Darkblood, and Debbie are all trying to figure out the truth. Their investigations are very captivating and add a lot of tension to the story. And while Debbie and Cecil try to figure out what to do about Nolan, we also get to see Mark trying to live up to his father's legacy, trying to be as great of a hero as he is. All of this builds beautifully to some great moments that weren't in the comic book, like Debbie confronting Nolan about his actions, Cecil using every weapon at his disposal to try and kill Nolan, and of course a moment that is in the comic book, Mark's fight with his dad. All of these moments were so satisfying because there was so much setup for them, and said setup gave us so much insight into these characters and their relationships with each other. As great as the comic book is, the TV show does an outstanding job expanding on these characters and making them far more interesting than they were before. One of the best examples of this is Debbie. The TV show improved her character so much. As stated before, she conducts her own investigation to figure out if Nolan killed the Guardians, making her more relevant to the plot. She's also a lot more bold and strong-willed compared to her comic book counterpart. There's especially a big difference between how show Debbie and comic Debbie deal with Nolan's absence. In the comic book, she's a drunken mess, even kind of blaming Mark for Nolan leaving at one point. Yeah, she was drunk, and she does apologize for this later, but it can be argued that she went a bit too far here. In the show, on the other hand, Debbie is much more level-headed, doing her best to try and keep it together, which makes the scenes where she does break down all the more powerful. The show also places a lot more importance on Debbie's relationship with Mark. They make it clear that Debbie raised Mark to be good, and that she's responsible for Mark becoming such a selfless hero, once again making Debbie feel more important to the story. Overall, Debbie is probably the most improved character in the TV show. They did a great job with her character. Another improved character would have to be the titular protagonist, Invincible, aka Mark Grayson. He starts out wanting to be just like his dad, only to condemn him later on and want to prove that he's nothing like him. Both the show and comic handle this pretty well. However, the show devotes a lot more time to this aspect of Mark's character. We see time and time again just how afraid he is of becoming anything like his dad, and how he's willing to do anything to prove to others and to himself that he's better. A terrific example of this is the Atlantis side quest. Mark is told that he has to marry the Queen of Atlantis since Omni-Man killed her husband. In the comic, Mark learns that the Queen's royal vizier is in love with her, so he decides to help him. He does this by making it look like he defeated a sea monster called the Depth Dweller all by himself, thus making him seem like a worthy mate for the Queen. Overall, this is definitely one of the weaker plot points from the comic book. It isn't that bad, but it does come across as filler. Sure, Mark having to marry the Queen was a direct result of Omni-Man's actions, but despite that, it doesn't actually connect to the overarching plot in any meaningful way. Now let's look at how the show handled this plotline. Mark finds out that the Queen actually doesn't want him to marry her and instead wants him to fight the Depth Dweller in a trial by combat. When the Depth Dweller breaks loose and starts killing Atlanteans, Mark wants to stay and help. But Cecil points out that they just tried to kill Mark. Mark argues that they only wanted justice for what his dad did. And when Cecil reminds Mark that he's not his father, Mark simply responds by saying, "That's why I'm going back." This is such a great character building moment for Mark, which shows that he is a true hero unlike his father. As I stated before, the show is great at expanding on certain plot points, like the subplot about Donald being a cyborg, but the show is also great at condensing certain plot points, such as the Rhiannon storyline. Having this plotline occur in just one episode, instead of needlessly dragging it out across over 30 issues, was a smart move. But it's especially amazing how the show even takes the time to expand on smaller and seemingly insignificant moments, like when Mark visits Rex in the hospital. After his near-death experience, we see Rex has come to regret the mistakes he's made in his life. Definitely another great character building moment. Now it's time to talk about the Thraxa arc. When it comes to the changes the TV show made to this arc from the comic book, there's definitely a lot to unpack here. The biggest changes made to this arc revolve around Omni-Man. We see him attempt to end his own life after leaving Earth, only stopping himself when he notices the Thraxans' ship getting sucked up by the black hole and deciding to save them. It's a beautiful sequence that enhances this story arc in the TV show. It also ties into the other change the show made to Omni-Man in this arc, why he chose to stay on Thraxa. In the comic book, Omni-Man only stays on Thraxa so he has another planet to offer to the Viltrum Empire after he abandoned his post on Earth. But in the show, he stays because the Thraxans gave him a purpose again. He was a hero again, just like he was on Earth. It shows that Nolan's time with humans really did change him. He just didn't realize it before it was too late. And while Nolan still doesn't understand why he cares for quote-unquote lesser life forms, he can't deny the fact that he does. On top of that, they also made some changes to Mark and Nolan's fight with the other Viltrumites. Mark's moral dilemma about not wanting to become his father is brought to the forefront once again. In the show, Mark is holding back in this fight because he doesn't want to kill anyone. Meanwhile, in the comic book, Mark just says that they're too fast for him. But the show improves this fight by making it about Mark's unwillingness to give in to his Viltrumite tendencies. We can sympathize with Mark because we know how important this is to him. He's constantly haunted by and struggling with the idea that he could potentially become a murderous Viltrumite just like his dad and the rest of their species. But Nolan makes it clear to Mark that this time he has to put that aside and fight like a Viltrumite if he wants to survive and save the Thraxans. And the scene where Mark stops holding back is so satisfying to watch. But even after Mark gains the upper hand in the fight, and he's about to land the finishing blow, he hesitates, showing that he still can't bring himself to kill. In a way, this teaches Mark a lesson. Sometimes he'll have to kill or it'll cost him. And the last thing I want to discuss concerning this arc is General Krieg's introduction. First off, I love that they don't patch Mark up in the show unlike the comic book, because it's more in line with the Viltrumites' beliefs. They are all about strength, so they're basically saying you have to be strong enough to survive your injuries on your own. They also completely change Krieg's dialogue in this scene. He still tells Mark that he has to take over his dad's mission and prepare the Earth for their conquest, but they remove the part where Krieg says you have 100 years to take over Earth. I always thought that was kind of a dumb line since they send not one but two Viltrumites to check on Mark's progress within like a month or two. To be honest, Krieg is far more menacing in the TV show's version of this moment compared to the comic book. Not only because of Clancy Brown's phenomenal voice acting, but also because here he fully acknowledges that Mark fights to protect physically weaker species, using it to his advantage by threatening to kill millions of humans if Mark doesn't comply. It shows that Viltrumites can be pretty smart and they're not all just brutes. Now it's time for the final topic I want to discuss in this video, the fight between Mark and Angstrom Levy. This fight was already great in the comic book, so it's absolutely astounding how the TV show was able to drastically improve this moment in so many different ways. Like when Mark has a moment where he tries to avoid fighting and talk things out with Angstrom, because he remembers that Angstrom was trying to do good when he first met him. We also get a glimpse into Angstrom's broken psyche. He has all these different memories of Mark from all his alternate selves that he's fused with, and it's genuinely kinda sad. The show also has Debbie fight back and talk back to Angstrom much more than she did in the comic book. Seeing Debbie stand up to him like this further strengthens her character. And finally, there's the end of the fight, where Mark lays the smackdown on Angstrom Levy. In the comic book, this beatdown isn't very long, only lasting a few panels, but the TV show makes this beating go on for much longer, and as a result, they add so much more weight to this moment, because it's no longer just a scene of Mark not holding back for a brief moment. Now it is a long and brutal beatdown that directly parallels Nolan's beating on Mark at the end of Season 1. Ever since then, Mark has been doing everything in his power to prove he's not like his father. But after this, there's no denying that he is Omni-Man's son. This fight is just so great from beginning to end. Everything about it works so well. Every single aspect is superb. Mark desperately trying to avoid fighting before finally snapping and mercilessly smashing Angstrom Levy into oblivion. Debbie having the guts to stand up to a psychotic supervillain. Angstrom having a mental breakdown due to all the new memories that are corrupting his mind. Honestly, what more could you possibly ask for? A perfectly crafted fight which embodies everything that makes this show so extraordinary. After everything I've discussed in this video, about how the TV show makes many changes to the comic book, big and small, which end up improving the story drastically, I gotta say, I cannot wait for Season 3. Because based on where we are in the show right now, they are most definitely adapting some of my favorite material from the comic book in the 3rd season. And I am so excited to see how the TV show tackles the next part of the story. If you're a fan of Invincible, then I hope this video has made you appreciate the series even more. And if you haven't seen it yet, I hope I've encouraged you to go check it out. If I left out any of your favorite changes the TV show made to the comic book, go ahead and leave a comment down below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Until next time.
I want to do what you do. I want to be just like you.
You will be, son. You will.